Hey, it's Chase with Oxford Partners. Hope you're doing well. I'm here with Ryan Hartsell, Managing Director. And today we were just talking offline about leases, landlord lease drafted documents, all the tenant perils, all the things that can go wrong, and some of the horror stories. And Ryan and I thought we should probably hit record and talk through some of those. Where did you want to start?
All right, thanks, Chase. So I was joking to you earlier, and I've been joking about this for many years. A lot of our clients view us as glorified apartment locators, where our primary role is to find the property and then negotiate the best rental price, the lease price. We actually do a lot more than that. We're not attorneys. We can't give legal advice, but all we do is negotiate these lease documents for a living. My actual favorite client to get, they're very difficult, is law firms. They're very hard to convince to hire you, but then once they hire you, they'll end up using us multiple times. And so I just want to kind of take the opportunity to visit a little bit about that. There's over 30 provisions that we actually negotiate. We just picked out a few that we wanted to talk about. I guess the first would be the relocation provision.
Yeah, and just before we jump into that, I just wanted to mention, I always like telling people this. When you think about an apartment lease, nobody really negotiates those, right? You just go in, you go sign it, whatever it says is whatever it is. And what's the value on that? Like $20,000 for that entire lease? In our leases, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're talking, in some cases, millions of dollars of lease value. It pays to pay attention to what's in the document. It really is important to look at these provisions. You have to realize that the majority of leases you're signing are landlord attorney drafted. So they're going to vary from somewhat favorable for the landlord to extremely favorable for the landlord. And where we come in is trying to balance that out. So that's what we try to do. So Ryan, you're mentioning the relocation provision. I always say the best relocation provision is the one that's not in there at all. Try to get it removed.
That's right.
That's possible. That's number one, right?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, in my heyday of cold calling, making lots of cold calls, seemed like once a week I would call on a tenant and they'd say they're not going to use their last agent because there's this relocation provision and they got forcibly relocated by their landlord. And so they're upset with their old agent that they didn't negotiate that out of the lease. And so they're happy to talk with you because we're not going to work with them again. And so whenever I'm negotiating those relocation provisions, I make sure that I paper it up, talk about it with my client multiple times, and we do everything that we can to get that thing out of there. I do have this one funny story, a lady that she's running a med spa out of an office building. And we met with her and she had a somewhat decent rate. She thought it was a great rate, but they were month to month and that they were going to maybe they could get forcibly relocated. One, they're month to month, and then also, even if you're not month to month, there's that relocation provision where the landlord can relocate you. And so I was urging them, let's go ahead and negotiate a new lease to get that relocation provision out. She didn't want to do that. So I told her that when the day comes that the landlord relocates you or gives you 30 days notice that you're going to vacate, remember me, call me. And so years went by and I forgot about it. And then a lady calls me and she's just crying on the phone, hey, I'm being forcibly relocated or kicked out of the building. And, it happens to you once and you remember that. So certainly relocation provision is very important. Number one is to make sure that's not in the lease. And then if you can't do that, sometimes smaller tenants, landlords will not agree to that. You at least have to have a right to terminate your lease if the landlord is relocating you and you disagree with the relocation location. So certainly you build teeth in it to where the landlord has to pay for that relocation, replace all your stationery, build it out exactly in the same quality and configuration, same views, same floor or higher. There's all these things that you can negotiate, but the big one is that you have a right to terminate if the landlord comes or should terminate if the landlord comes to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you can't get rid of it and you're putting teeth in it, another one is obviously making sure that the rent doesn't go up, even if the space is larger that they're substituting. And often they'll agree to do that because the reason they want to move you is to accommodate some larger deal and they'd like to keep you in the building knowing it's an inconvenience to the tenant. So at least you can do some things like that to make it a little more palatable, but try to get it removed if you can.